Everyone, this is Elena, and I'm back today showing you a technique how to do partial embossing using the MISTI tool. So I'm making a New Year's card because it's New Year, so Happy New Year. I'm using here my very first MISTI. Usually use that one for my background stamps, and I just stamped this diagonal stripe stamp from Stampin' Up onto the grid paper. I apologize for my hair here. And I line up my card front. This is kind of pink coral color. So I'm gonna stamp these diagonal stripes using Versamark. So now I'm inking the stamp using the Versamark. My Versamark is kind of dry, so I'm just applying some pressure to make sure that I have even coverage. So, and because it's a large area, it needs to be inked up well. So then I'm just pressing. We just need the size because we're gonna have another layer on top. So we need to make sure that all the edges around are inked nicely. So now I'm going back again and I'm gonna stamp on top of it because my paper didn't move. So here I didn't really secure it with the magnets because it's a background stamp. So next I'm gonna use some gold embossing powder to cover that whole background, and next I'll heat set it. As well, when you do this part, make sure that you apply the embossing buddy or the embossing tool onto your card so you don't have stray embossing powder sticking everywhere. I forgot to mention that part when I started, but I did that. So my embossing powder, it just sticking to the stripes instead of kind of going everywhere. So I have it almost covered here. I'm just making sure that everything has nice coverage. And next I'm going to use my heat tool to melt that embossing powder, and you can tell how it starts to melt. It's getting very shiny. So I'm just going slowly, making sure everything is melted nicely. So when I looked at it closely, I noticed that there was one spot that it didn't melt. So I went back with the embossing gun one more time. So next, now we're done with the background and we're gonna stamp the front, kind of the main image. So I'm gonna use this, it's a celebration stamp set from Stampin' Up, and it has these little cute sprinklers, or however they're called, sparkles. So I'm just stamping the body, the stick. So I'm using, first I inked it with Versamark so the ink, it inks up nicely. I'm using cantaloupe, fresh cantaloupe ink pad from Hero Arts. My Stampin' Up ink pads are still in the garage, so I'm using something very close to the color of the cardstock for the background I'm using. So stamp that one there. Next I want to move it, well, not really move it, but next I'll stamp over it again. This time I inked my stamp just a little bit with Versamark on the top, and then I removed some with my cloth. Next then I'm applying the embossing powder, and I'll just heat set it, and we'll have, with this technique, I'm just removing some of the embossing powder, you can achieve partial embossing. And it's, as well, you make sure that the image that you stamp with the Versamark is stamped of the same image you already stamped with different ink. So now I'm using some imaging sheet. This is like, I think, for quilting, to stamp that sprinkle, sparkler, however they're called, stick one more time and kind of position where I want it to be. So that's good. And next I'm securing my cardstock using the magnets. I'm just stamping that one. So next I'm inking just the top, removing some of the ink with Versamark with my finger, and then applying some gold embossing powder. And next I'll just heat set that one very quick and move on to the next step. Next we'll stamp the sparkles. So I have the largest one. I kind of eyeballed it to go directly on top of the the stick. So next I'm just cleaning my imaging sheet and I'm gonna position it again, and I'm gonna stamp onto that imaging sheet. Now make sure that you have some space on top so you can move and position your image perfectly, and then add the magnets. So I'm holding that cardstock securely before I add the magnets, and next I'm stamping that one. So now I'm cleaning my stamp, and I'll be using Versamark ink cube, and I'll just apply it to the center, and then using my fingers gonna wipe off some of around that area. Next I'll apply again the embossing powder, and I'm gonna heat set it. So I'm just cleaning the stray embossing powders particles from around. Now I've zapped it with my heat gun, and embossing powder melted. So next I'm I was trying to look to see how the sentiment will look. Next I'm positioning the sparkle over the second image, and I'll repeat the same process. First stamp it with color, and then just apply Versamark to the center, wipe off some with my finger, and then stamp onto my image, and then emboss with gold embossing powder. So we have that one. Now I'm just gonna add that embossing powder, and you can see how it's not even, it's kind of more funky looking, in a good way funky. So next I'm positioning my sentiment. I want to go across, then I'm gonna use again that imaging sheet, I'm gonna stamp position the sentiment, actually now I'm doing the second, I completely forgot, I apologize. I'm doing the smaller sparkles in the center, so I'm using the same process, using that imaging sheet, I'm stamping on it and then positioning my panel underneath and securing it with my magnets. I'm repeating the same process for both sparklers. So there we have one, and then I'm putting back that positioning imaging sheet again, and positioning my cardstock underneath, securing it with the magnets, and stamping with the fresh cantaloupe ink pad. So next I'm gonna do the sentiment. Now it's the time for the sentiment, and I'm positioning it to see where it's gonna go, and then stamping again on that imaging sheet to make sure that it's positioned properly. So that almost looks good. I'm just gonna pull it up a little bit so it's a little bit lower, secure it with my magnets, and stamp with Versamark, because we're gonna emboss the sentiment with gold embossing powder. So I just cleaned up my stamp, I'm inking it up and stamping, and I'm repeating the process again, and then I'm gonna apply some gold embossing powder, and then I'll just heat set it. So there we have that. Now I'm using my heat tool to melt that embossing powder, and you can see how it's melting very quickly. So there, we are almost done here. So next I'll just trim my panel to a smaller size, and here we have that, and I'm using some fun foam on the back to add some dimension. So I'm using the fast fuse to adhere everything together. So I'm just applying on the panel, then I'm gonna add the fun foam, then I'm gonna go on the pink panel, that's basically the card front, apply some fast fuse and adhere my layer. Now I'm just gonna prepare a white card base. We're gonna adhere this one on top of the card base. So notice it's a little bit wider, so it wasn't exactly 4 1/4, so just trimmed it off a little bit. Next I'm positioning that card base into my MISTI into the corner without the mouse pad or the pad on, so it has like a little bit more depth to it. So next I'm using the MISTI to position everything perfectly. So I have that card base in the corner and I'm adding, kind of shoving that panel in the corner to adhere it. So that's all for today. Thanks for watching and see you soon in another video. Bye!